Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Taylor from LincolnConspirators.com, and today I'm so excited to have another author interview. My guest today is author and researcher Reignette Chilton. In 2019, Ms. Chilton published her first book, Lincoln's Greatcoat, The Unlikely Odyssey of a Presidential Relic, which documented the story and the story of the impressive custom-made Brooks Brothers greatcoat that Abraham Lincoln wore at his second inauguration on March 4th, 1865. And then a little over a month later, the president wore the same greatcoat to Ford's Theater on that fateful night of April 14th. The greatcoat was later given to a White House doorkeeper whose family held onto it until the 1968 when it was purchased and donated to the Ford's Theater Museum. Now, Reignette has followed up on that book with a new book called Lincoln's Frock Coat, which explores the kind of undercoat that Lincoln was wearing on April 14th, 1865, and the mystery regarding which coat is the right coat, because there are several claims to what the legitimate coat is. And so today I'm looking forward to a great conversation with Reignette about really all of these coats, about her history with Lincoln and Lincoln wardrobe, and just learning about a lot of great history and about her great books. So, Reignette, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I want to start by asking you a bit about your own background. In the preface of your books, you note that you worked for Brooks Brothers for about 25 years.
hmm
How did you get started with Brooks Brothers, and like what positions did you have while you worked there?
Okay. Well, hi, Dave, and
Hi,
hi
sorry.
to
I
your
should have
audience
started with
again.
hi. Yeah.
First, thanks for inviting me to share about my passion. Brooks Brothers, as you noted, I spent 25 years there. My goal was to spend about a year initially. It was between careers. I began my career out of college as a school teacher, teaching in the public schools, and then midway in my mid 20s, I decided to explore other opportunities. And there was an opportunity to work at Brooks Brothers. And I thought, well, I'll give it about a year. Well, I ended up staying 25 years there.
Mhm.
I worked at various locations. Eventually, I spent the bulk of my time in its corporate offices right in the heart of Midtown Manhattan, 346 Madison Avenue. And in that role, I guess you'd call me a corporate trainer. I traveled throughout the country and Canada, visiting a lot of Brooks Brothers stores, and really had a wonderful career there at Brooks Brothers. And it was a 25 very happy years.
And we were talking before we started recording. I noticed that the frame picture above your head there, and we'll get to it, has the embroidered eagle and the phrase "One country, one destiny" that was put in Lincoln's greatcoat. And
That's
so
right.
and you said that is a retirement gift.
Yes, they gave it to me when I retired, took an early retirement there and went on to another career. But, I cherish that very much. And the sentiments is expressed in it as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Brooks Brothers is old, right? It's an old company. I
1818. Yeah.
1818. Is that make it the oldest like clothing brand in America or close to it?
In existence today, currently, yes.
Okay.
I mean, other retailers have been around equally as long or a little bit younger, but for clothing, yes.
So
1818.
when in obviously you're a corporate trainer and you're doing these lots of positions at Brooks Brothers, when did the kind of the history of the company start to be really of interest to you?
Well, pretty much from the start, where it's drilled into us pretty much in the beginning. We go through a very thorough orientation, um, and we're constantly reminded. We were reminded through displays, through events of its history, not only with politicians or presidents, but also with Hollywood corporate titans. All sorts of innovations that it's made. For instance, you're wearing a button-down shirt there, the polo.
I am.
Brooks Brothers created the polo button down in the late
Really?
1800s. A lot of innovations as well. So when I say drilled into us, we're exposed to it all. We were exposed to it all the time there at Brooks Brothers. They're very proud of their heritage, and they are today. They remain so today.
Well, and so you talk, you're learning, there's a lot of history with Brooks Brothers, and I liked in your book that you kind of talk about, in both books, you kind of talk about kind of the history of Brooks Brothers and just they are the clothiers to pretty much all the important people you can think of throughout history. Um,
Mhm.
and so, what, and in your book, you talk about how at Brooks Brothers, is it the headquarters? Is it their main, like the one that has the display about Abraham Lincoln? Where is that one?
Yes, that's the headquarters, what we call the flagship store.
Hmm.
It's no longer there, but it was at 346 Madison Avenue.
And this is a picture.
This is their newest store
Oh,
down
okay.
more in Lower Manhattan. Um, it's worth a visit. It opened up, I guess, about a year or so ago, and it's the new flagship store.
Ah, I see. Gotcha. And so they have this nice, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, a display about Abraham Lincoln and his Brooks Brothers history. Now, I noted in your new book, you talk a little bit about some of the claims, especially regarding this mirror. Is that correct? That they make a claim that Lincoln came in and looked at this mirror, and you were a little
Yeah.
suspect of that claim.
Yeah, there's a little revisionist history in there. Maybe they take more of a creative license. But what we see in that picture there, first of all, is a replica of the Greatcoat to the right,
Hmm.
and Brooks Brothers has uh, created several replicas, one of which they donated to the National Park Service in 1990. And then they use this replica and others to donate to presidential libraries throughout the country. I know it's been on display at the Reagan Presidential Library, and I believe the Hayes Presidential Library, and I also believe it was on display at Hildene at one time, which was Robert Lincoln's summer home. Now, the mirror,
Hmm.
I guess the period, the Civil War period, 1800s, it puts it in the right time. But the claim that Abraham Lincoln, and you would know this much better than I would, that Abraham Lincoln was a frequent visitor to the store during his presidency, just doesn't carry historical weight. I don't believe he ever returned to New York City after he was inaugurated, other than quietly passing through the city to visit West Point.
Yeah,
So
he was pretty busy just to go shopping.
correct.
Yeah.
And, I said once when I gave a presentation, well, maybe they put that mirror in a stagecoach and took it down to the White House.
There you
But it
go.
was really Mary Lincoln who did the shopping. I really question whether he even stepped foot in a store.
Right. Yeah, it seems to be the case.
Yeah.
All right. So what motivated you? So you're working for Brooks Brothers for so long. You're really entrenched in the history and just the legacy of this amazing brand. What motivated you to write a book about Lincoln's Greatcoat?
Well, it was an accident,
Oh,
but
okay.
I saw a display similar to this at
Mhm.
its old flagship store at 346 Madison Avenue, and this was in 2009, and it was on the occasion of Abraham Lincoln's bicentennial, and they had a beautiful display just like this, and I remember going back to my desk and reading some articles over the ensuing days about the clothing. I took another look into the fact that the original Brooks Brothers coat returned to Ford's Theater in 1968. Now, Lincoln's assassinated and dies in 1865. So, what happens to the clothing for 103 years? Where did it go? Did it just stay in a box or what? So Brooks Brothers, I began to ask a lot of questions, and I was asking them of myself, and I approached Brooks Brothers, and they graciously invited me to view its collection of archives. And when I viewed the collection, I saw a letterpress copy of correspondence that the clothier wrote to Mary Lincoln in 1863, noting that it would send a representative to the executive mansion, which is what the White House was often called, to take the measure of His Excellency the President for clothing. Then I also found, and what we call, as you know, with research, is primary source materials, which is really imperative when you're researching and writing eventually writing about it. Correspondence between Brooks Brothers and the Don family, they were the holders of the coat in the 1920s. Correspondence between Brooks Brothers and the Smithsonian in the 1940s. So I began to put the puzzles, these were all pieces of puzzles, and I began to slowly put them together. And what I love about researching is that as you're reading a document, you find another name or another clue, another nugget, and that leads to something else. So I started with the archives at Brooks Brothers, and then I proceeded to the archives at Ford's Theater. They were very kind and gracious to allow me to come down and look through their archives. And then it provided more and more clues where I began to research collections at various academic institutions throughout the country. I worked with a lot of researchers. They're great to work with, and archivists. And what I tell people is I was amassing all this research, and I kind of fell into the hole and said, the only way I'm going to get out is if I tell this story.
Right.
So I thought, I've got to tell this story. There's a story here. It's untold. And especially when I learned about the drama with the auction and all these accusations of crooked work. And I thought, wow, this is a story that needs to be told. So hence my book came out about 10 years later. It took a lot of time, but it came out.
So it started really as an interest, just like, I want to
Yes,
know more about this. And then you were doing historical research without even the idea of a book, just like, well, I need to follow these leads to see where they
yes,
go.
yes.
And that's what I love about both of your books is that it's very clear that you are acting as like a historical detective, like that
Mhm.
we're laying out the evidence. It's like, let's see where all of this primary sources, the contrary information, like you said, accusations of fraud and drama. It's like, but how can we follow this to hopefully find an answer?
Mhm.
Had you done any sort of historical research or writing prior to this project?
Other than Brooks Brothers, I did write pieces for Brooks Brothers on its history, and that also propelled me to take it one step um, further and write a book about it. I wrote a little bit about the history, and I would send them out to the stores and the teams, and the response was pretty positive. But other than that, no, I've read a lot, and I've
Hmm.
been an admirer of Abraham Lincoln. I've read a lot of books, um, especially as we approached, the bicentennial of his birth, and then the remembrance of his death in 2015.
Well, and I have to say, I'm blown away for both of your books. For someone who didn't, I mean, you had experience for Brooks Brothers, but in terms of like historical writing, and I was going to bring this up later, but you're really good at it. Like especially like presenting the facts, like digging into it, really doing the process of history. I'm just very impressed by both of your books.
Well,
And
thank
how
you,
you're
Dave.
able to tell that story because it's hard and not everyone is built for it. And when you see someone who kind of can present it so easily and has that makes it investigative. Like it really draws you in, and that is definitely the case in both of your books. So this is your first one. Came out in 2019. Lincoln's Greatcoat, the Unlikely Odyssey of a Presidential Relic. All of that research you've been working on for 10 years. Putting it together about the Greatcoat.
Mhm.
When you wrote, now you reference the frock coats in this one.
Mhm.
But really, the book was about the Greatcoat. Was there ever a period when you were working on your first book where you were already thinking ahead to be like, well, there's another book in this debate over the frock coats, or was it this one always going to be just the Greatcoats, and then motivation for your second book came later?
Motivation for the book came later. I was so engrossed in, I think, Brooks Brothers, and that the fact that they created this great coat for his second inauguration. It wasn't meant to be an assassination relic.
Got it.
And in my book, I have a chapter devoted to the history of the clothier. I talk about um, his second inauguration, and then the preservation of the Greatcoat after it was donated. But I never thought that I would write another book about the frock coat. I focused primarily, even though I referenced the other frock coat, especially when there was the controversy over an auction, which I know we'll talk about. My focus was on Brooks Brothers, the coat it made for President Lincoln, and where it is today, and how it will survive for in the future.
Right. And yeah, so it's interesting how I remember meeting you at one of the Surratt Society conferences, which is a Lincoln assassination conference. What brought you into our realm? Obviously, this is the coat that Lincoln was wearing when he was assassinated, but like you said, the book really wasn't about, it's more about that the Brooks brothers, how they made it for this very momentous second inauguration, and the assassination is like, oh, and also he was wearing it, when he was shot.
Mhm.
What brought you into kind of, more my field, into the world of Lincoln assassination? What made you think, well, maybe I should start delving into this area as well?
Well, I have to give credit to you. You had a site um, which was called Boothie Barn,
That was,
which
yeah, my old name for my site. Yes.
yes, it's now the
Lincoln
Abraham Lincoln
Conspirators.
assassination site. So I started to follow that.
Okay.
And then I joined some symposiums, the Lincoln Assassination Symposium. And then I saw that there were conferences, and it just piqued my interest. And I thought, wow, I'm going to gobble this up and attend as many as I can. I joined a wonderful group, the Lincoln Group of New York, which doesn't primarily focus on the assassination. It's all things Lincoln.
Right.
But
There's plenty of assassination buffs in there, in
yes,
amongst that group who I know well. Yes.
yes, and really detailed research. So it was just a variety, and yeah, I guess you get bitten by the bug. And I'm impressed with the research and the scholarship, and just gobbled it all up, as I still do today.
Yeah, once you get bitten by that Lincoln bug, no matter how it is,
Mhm.
it stays with
Mhm.
you.
It does.
What was the most challenging part about kind of researching and writing your first book about the Greatcoat?
Well, two things. First, I had a full-time job,
Yeah.
and so this was my second career, I used to call it. Balancing time, just work-life balance with a job, with everything else in life, number one. Number two, the organization. You really need to be organized when you're doing research. And if you can't let something go, if you find something and say, I'm going to get back to it later, no, you need to tag it, you need to document it, you really need to be organized. I had to do a fair amount of traveling.
Absolutely.
I took thankfully in the New York metro area, I was able to get to Washington easily, back and forth. I made several trips down to Washington. And also, finding people who were characters, to see if they were still alive.
Yeah.
I was in of course, not the 1800s, but especially during the time of when the garments were returned to Ford's Theater in 1968, and to speak to the cast of characters. And I was glad I was able to connect with several who have since passed away,
Mhm.
but I was able to connect with them at that time.
I'm curious, when was the first time that you saw Lincoln's Greatcoat in person? Do you remember, was that before your research, or was it during the process? When did you actually see the Greatcoat?
When I saw the real
The
Greatcoat,
real one, yeah.
it wasn't until 2015, and
Oh,
that was at
okay.
the Silent Witnesses
Yes, I saw it there as
exhibition.
well. Hmm.
Right. They removed the Greatcoat from the permanent display in 2011. So, I just started my research. I knew there was when I say they, Ford's Theater removed the
Hmm.
Greatcoat, but I saw the original in 2015. There was a wonderful display put on by Ford's Theater and the Ford's Theater Society. You were there
Yep.
that evening, that great celebration. And then the National Park Service invited me to view the Greatcoat in its storage facility.
Oh, that's
And I
cool.
went there in 2016,
Hmm.
and they allowed me to take some pictures. And I saw the Greatcoat at that time as well. And then I saw it again in 2022 when the Greatcoat was on display as part of an exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Yeah, I remember when I kind of one of the first times I visited Ford's Theater, they still had the gray coat on display in like a big circular display thing, like almost in the lobby of the
That
theater.
it was in the lobby, yes.
Kind of not a really good place to try to
No.
keep it because in the lobby, I mean, yeah, I mean, it looked interesting, but it was a very strange place to put it. And then, yeah, since then, now they're really taking care of it. So that's why they have all the replicas made.
Yeah. It's in a storage facility. It's kept cool. They don't touch it. It's on the platform there.
Yeah.
Um, and that's it in storage. And I think in that picture, they were moving the coat to transporting the coat to the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
And then, of course, I'm gonna quickly scroll through some pictures real quick too. Of course, the beautiful thing about the gray coat is the embroidery. Is that the right word? What the
Yeah,
design inside?
it's a quilted lining, but of
Okay.
course that's an embroidered declaration, one country, one destiny. It's attributed, of course, to Senator Daniel Webster, and it was a fitting gift for the president um, for his inauguration on March 4th, 1865. We were hopefully at that point, the nation was hopeful that the bloody Civil War was finally coming to an end and that we would unite together as one country, one destiny. I think that's an enduring declaration, which holds true today. And what we see here is this the quilted lining, but then you see the embroidery.
Hmm.
And there was a young seamstress. Her name was Agnes Breckenridge at the time. And she embroidered this motto on two inside panels of the greatcoat. So he had two panels on the right, one on the right, one on the left, and each had this embroidered declaration.
And this was something that Brooks Brothers just did, right? It's not like that Lincoln was like, I would like you to put these phrases on there, correct? They just were like, this is for the president. We're gonna fancy it up.
Yes, but this is part of why I think research is so exciting. I have yet to find a document which shows whether they gifted this to him,
Right.
whether other politicians had it made for him, and whether he chose the lining, the inscription. I can't prove it yet, but it's something might turn up.
Right, exactly. And you're still digging in.
Yes, that's right.
But it is kind of, this is, I mean, from the outside, it looks like it's a nice gray coat, but kind of what makes it just as iconic as it is because of just this beautiful embroidery work on the inside. And I cropped out
Yes,
part of it has a shield as well, I believe, and
that's
other
right.
decorative
Yep.
flourishes.
Right.
Um,
Shields surround the eagle there in flight, and the
mhm,
streamer. It has a streamer in its beak
mhm,
with the banner "One Country," expressing one country, one destiny. And that
gotcha.
was a common theme during the Civil War.
Hmm.
There were rallies which used that theme often.
Absolutely. So the first book, comes out in 2019. It's a success. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic that immediately comes thereafter kind
Mhm.
of, cut short your like book talks and things like that. But eventually you do give some speeches and you talk about in the preface of your new book that it was while you were preparing for a talk for the Lincoln Group of New York about your first book that the idea that there was enough information about this second book, came to mind. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. The Lincoln Group of New York has been around since 1978, and it's an eclectic group of renowned Lincoln historians, scholars, and Lincoln enthusiasts such as myself. It's open to anyone who has a genuine interest in learning more about Abraham Lincoln. It holds 3 dinner meetings every year. And if you're in the New York metro area, I encourage you to join and come check it out. They do have a website. You can find your information there. I've been a member there for a number of years, and they generously asked me to give a presentation in 2023 in April, at its April meeting in 2023.
Hmm.
Now, these are heavy hitters, some of them sitting there.
Yes.
So I really worked on the presentation. And at that time, I was beginning to um, wonder about the suit, which was also part of the Don collection. And when I say the Don collection, Alfonso Don was a doorman at the White House, and he held the overcoat, which we call the Greatcoat, and he also held a black suit. The overcoat, as you saw in the picture there, was cut from the neck to the elbow. And yet the black suit is not, it's intact. And I read through all of the preservation reports. There was no notation about any cuts to the garment. And then I began to dig a little more into what I call Lincoln's first responders, the two physicians who reached the box first, right after Lincoln, right after the shot occurred. And that was Dr. Charles Leal and Dr. Charles Taft. And as you know, Dave, some of Dr. Leal's reports have recently surfaced within
Yep.
the past 25 years or so, or even sooner.
There's even a
And
couple auctions right now that have like his bullet point notation. The currently for sale, you can buy some of Dr. Leal's like giving speeches, bullet points of what he is saying that are up for auction just this week.
over the Freeman auction, I think, right?
Yes,
In
yes,
New
they
York.
they they
Yes.
have they have two different ones that they're selling soon, and one has a little sketch that Leal made of Booth holding a knife and falling, but it's a really rough sketch. But yeah, just even today we have little things popping up with Dr. Leal accounts.
Yeah, that's probably out of my budget, but
Oh, definitely, definitely mine too.
yeah, but they're great I love to read about them.
Yeah.
Um, so when I gave my presentation, I decided to bring this up, that I had some lingering doubts about the suit. They were interested, of course, in Brooks Brothers, where I'm giving the presentation in New York City, and I
Mhm.
talked a little bit about the history of Brooks Brothers. And I talked primarily about the Greatcoat. But then at the conclusion, near the conclusion of my presentation, I brought up the black suit and my
And this is
doubts
this
about
is a
it.
picture of that black suit, the Don
Yes,
suit from on display at Ford's Theater.
right.
Okay.
And I brought up my doubts about it because it didn't evince the damage that the doctors wrote about in the reports. And Dr. Leal said that when he reached the president, there's all this blood in the box, because we know if Henry Rathbone was stabbed severely, Dave, and correct me on this, I believe his left arm was nearly severed. So there's a lot of blood all over the place. Dr. Leal suspects that Lincoln has been stabbed under the collarbone on the left side. So he asks a gentleman in the box. First of all, he puts the president in a recumbent position, and he asks a gentleman in the box to cut the coat open from the neck to the elbow. And Dr.
Which is why we
Taft.
have some of this damage to the
Correct.
Greatcoat.
You see the damage right there. And then Dr. Taft, when he arrives quickly, within probably a minute or seconds later, he noted in his medical diary that he observed that Dr. Leal had caused the clothing to be cut off, and he could see the president's bare left shoulder. So when I talked about that a little bit with the group, they challenged me on that. They said they're not sure if that suit is the real one, especially when I said there's another frock coat out in Chicago and it's in storage, and it evinces damage very similar to the Greatcoat. And they encouraged me to dig more into the physician's records, and look at it more closely. So we could have gone on all night talking about it, but of course, I was on a time schedule, and people need to get home. So I remember getting back on the train thinking, I'm going to look more into this. I'm going to
Yeah.
start reading the reports from Dr. Leal, who wrote reports over an expansive period from 1865 all the way up to 1909,
Yeah.
and also Dr. Taft. And in each report, Dr. Leal mentions having having the coat, the waistcoat, everything cut off, as did Dr. Taft. So that kind of again, it propelled me to looking into other things about the lives of the cast of characters in the White House. And again, I guess you might say I fell into it and said the only way to get out of this one now is maybe another book. Tell the story
Exactly.
again.
I'm glad. So let's go over wardrobe, which I love. In your new book, you do a good job of talking about what
Mm-hmm.
did men wear,
Yeah.
especially people like the presidents. So, and this is a picture of, like I said, of the Don, like whole suit of clothes. I think it wasn't just another coat like the overcoat, but a whole suit of clothes. Can you kind of give us an overview of kind of what Lincoln's average outfit like looked like? What did dressing look like for men of his stature at the time?
Yeah, well, it looked exactly like this. Um, in Lincoln's time, a gentleman, the business suit consisted of what we call a frock coat. Now, that's the suit jacket. Think of it
Hmm.
as a suit jacket.
Hmm.
However, it was very long. It extended to the
Yeah.
bend of the knee. And Lincoln's clothes, it's right there, right at the knee.
Yeah.
Also, a gentleman would wear a waistcoat, which is a vest.
Okay.
Of course,
Yeah, a
a
lot of the
white shirt.
names of things have changed too. Like you
Yes,
you bring up a stock a lot in the book, and I was like,
right.
what is a stock?
Yeah, the stock was the tie, the necktie or the bow tie.
Hmm.
It was a loosely formed adornment, and you can see it there.
Hmm.
It wasn't an ascot, if you remember the ascot, very formal tie or a cravat with intricate bows. This was just a pre-tied, I don't even, not the bow tie of today, but it was considered a bow tie. It was a pre-tie
Hmm.
that a gentleman would put on. Lincoln was often criticized because his bow tie was crooked. The white shirt would be linen or cotton, but it was always black, sometimes navy blue, very dark, but the business suit was black, frock coat right down to the bend of the knee, trousers, which were a very high instep, and no cuffs, straight down. And the break, probably no break, went right straight. And that was what you see there was a gentleman's business attire during Lincoln's time.
Gotcha. All right, so we know April 14th, 1865, Lincoln comes to Ford's Theater wearing a normal business suit like this, and he's also wearing his large Brooks Brothers overcoat for warmth.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, I looked it up. The temperature in DC at 9 p.m. on the night of April 14th was 54 degrees, and then it dropped, of course, as the play went on. So it was still a little chilly, and you know, um, now when they get to Ford's, generally you take off if I go to the theater today, I usually take my coat off. Obviously, I have to stick it in my seat with me. We're not the president. We don't have a fancy box. Does Lincoln keep the greatcoat on when he sits down in the presidential box?
No, by all accounts, he took it off because Henry Rathbone, he was one of the guests there in the box, guest of the first couple, Henry Rathbone and his fiancee Clara Harris. Henry Rathbone provided an affidavit shortly thereafter the assassination, and that he said that Abraham Lincoln, once he reached the box, he remained seated in his rocker except for once when he rose to put on his greatcoat. So I'm sure, it's a chilly, damp evening in Washington City. He gets a little cold and then he puts on the greatcoat, and then he sits back down.
And then that is what he is wearing when Booth
Mm-hmm.
sneaks in and fires the shot. And so that's very clear from just the descriptions and and the damage to the gray coat itself that there's really no doubt that this is the coat he was wearing when he was
Mm-hmm.
assassinated. But as your new book explores, what about that frock coat, that other coat, that business suit coat, as you mentioned? Which one was he wearing? Because your book explores that there are three known frock coats that have been at various times claimed to be the frock coat that Lincoln was wearing when he was shot. And now it's not unusual, as you know from your research, for there to be more than one claimant for certain historical relics. There's in the field of Lincoln assassination, especially, there's like a plethora
Yes.
of John Wilkes Booth spurs that exist out there that all claim they're the ones that got tripped up by the flag or by the portrait of Washington and things like that. But for a lot of disputed artifacts, usually the provenance or the history behind them are usually pretty weak. And so it's usually probably the case that none of them are probably the real thing, or we really
Yeah.
have no idea because it was just, oh, my uncle blankety blank said it was, you
Mhm.
know. But when it comes to these three frock coats, they each have a really fascinating and detailed like provenance that makes it so you can't immediately dispute or like disregard any of them as just being a
Mhm.
fraud. And mostly because they all kind of come back to the same source. Can you kind of talk about where did these three frock coats that exist in different museums now, one in Chicago, one in the Smithsonian, and one in Ford's Theater, where did all of these come from?
Well, they came right from Abraham Lincoln via his wife, Mary. Um, as many of your listeners will know, she didn't attend any of her husband's funeral rites. She holed herself up right in a uh, spare bedroom, I believe, Dave, in the White
Yes,
House
yeah.
executive mansion. But she has to leave, even though she doesn't leave or depart the executive mansion until May 23rd. So she has to gather her things and depart from the White House. So May, I guess around May 10th or so, Governor Andrew, he is the governor of Massachusetts, and he writes to Mary Lincoln. They had a cordial relationship before that time, and he introduces a well known Boston artist named William Morris Hunt. And in his letter, he basically says that the artist has a commission to paint a posthumous portrait of her husband, a full length portrait, and he'd like to obtain several items to complement the his artistry, and one of which is a black suit. Now, Mary Lincoln acquiesces to his request and sends a doorkeeper by the name of Thomas Pendel, who many said resembled Lincoln and that he was tall and lanky. And she sends him up to Boston during the month of May, where he poses in what he later said was his master's clothes. All right. He returns to the White House before Mary Lincoln departs, but he leaves the suit with the artist Matthew Henry Wilson. The grantor of the commission rescinds his offer,
Mm.
and Wilson, there's a little drama in there, and I go into my book about it into my book. Wilson decides, pardon me, William Morris Hunt. Sorry about that. William Morris Hunt is the author. He's a little annoyed that his commission has been rescinded, so he keeps the portrait. And what we see here is a preliminary sketch of the portrait, which Thomas Pendel brought back with him also to the White House. Now, the portrait stays in Hunt's studio, and it's later consumed by the Great Boston Fire in the early 1870s. It is destroyed, but the suit miraculously survives. And years later, in the 1890s, with Hunt now dead, his widow, Louisa, donates it to the Smithsonian. They called it the Smithsonian Institute back then, the Smithsonian Institution. She is friendly with the Smithsonian's secretary, so she writes to him, and she calls it a significant emblem of American royalty. It's described at the time of donation as Lincoln's office suit, and the Smithsonian Institution has made no claims that he wore it on the night of April 14th, 1865. However, that hasn't stopped people from, and journalists, from claiming that's the actual frock coat that he had on, or the suit, when he met his assassin's bullet. And in my book, I talk about various correspondents, newspaper correspondents who saw the garment in the late 1800s, and they called it, they beheld Lincoln's death garment. And even today, I'll have people come to me and say, oh, Lincoln, the suit Lincoln wore when he was assassinated, that's in the Smithsonian, right? No, it's not. So that's one. And the provenance, I think, is very strong in that we have the letter that Governor Andrew wrote to Mrs. Lincoln. We also have Hunt's widow's letter and correspondence that she gave to the Smithsonian, and which you can see in their archives. So the provenance on that is, it is indeed an actual Lincoln relic. It's a real Lincoln relic. That's undisputable.
Yeah, and I had the chance. I took this picture myself during 2018 when there was I had a private tour group that we went and saw different artifacts. They pulled it out of storage and they brought out this coat. And now I don't recall exactly. They probably described it as an office coat, but I'll tell you, we were surrounded by other Lincoln assassination objects, and they pulled this out. So undoubtedly, some of the people on that tour group probably walked away thinking, I saw the coat he was wearing when he was shot. And so I can understand, like you said, Smithsonian has never claimed that this is the assassination suit, but lots of people who have seen it have made that mistake. So much so that, that's why you had to include it in your book as one of the ones, you needed to clean up that history for everyone, because many people are going to believe that this is the one because it's with so many other assassination relics.
That's right. That's right. Now it's on limited display at the Smithsonian. It's currently not on display. That was a real coup that you got to see that. I'm hopeful that it will come out again. It was in the book, I talk about its display in 2009, 2012, and with this, the birthday of the country. Who knows? But
Yeah. Oh, and they have a whole suit. This was just the jacket that they pulled out. But
yes,
correct me, Smithsonian has an entire Lincoln suit. Mary Lincoln gave an entire suit,
yes,
just like we
yes,
saw the one at Ford's Theater, looking just like that. And
right.
yeah,
And that was the suit that Thomas Pendel wore
got it.
when he posed for the artist William Morris Hunt. And earlier I had referred to him as Wilson, and I apologize, but it was William Morris Hunt.
Gotcha. So this was, out of the three frock coats that you describe in the book, this was kind of the easiest one to kind of be like,
Yes.
it's not the assassination one. Clearly, people have just
Mm-mm.
been confused over the years. And so the chapter on that one is kind of the smallest. And then it comes to our next two, where it's just a lot of debate. Can you talk about the recipients of the two other frock coats and their relationship, like, to the Lincolns?
Sure. There was another doorkeeper at the White House. His name was Alfonso Don. And by the way, Alfonso Don and Thomas Pendel were once policemen with the Washington City's Metropolitan Police Force. And the way they wended their way up to the White House was they were assigned a few days before Lincoln's reelection in 1864 to protect the president. And they eventually transitioned from Presidential Guard to doorkeepers. So Alfonso Don began his illustrious career in the White House in November of 1864. In January of 1865, he was assigned as a doorkeeper. So he didn't know the Lincolns very long. And Mrs. Lincoln, after her husband's demise, she wrote Alfonso Don a letter. And this was right before she departed the White House, which he and his heirs wisely held on to. And it's basically a short sentence that says the suit of clothes that she's giving to Alfonso Don, she's going to give him a suit of clothes. But first, they are with an artist named Matthew Henry Wilson. And once he's finished with the clothing, then he can collect them. Now, Matthew Wilson, Henry Wilson was another artist, very similar. He's a portrait artist, just like William Morris Hunt. What makes him special is that, pardon me, Matthew Henry Wilson painted the last lifelike portrait of Abraham Lincoln.
Ah,
Abraham Lincoln sat for him in February of 1865.
mm,
Wilson signed the portrait in April of 1865, around the time of the president's demise. It was a bust-length portrait.
mm.
So in this situation, from what I've read in looking through Wilson's diary, he was thinking of painting a posthumous full-length portrait. And he noted in his diary that Mary Lincoln sent the clothing for full length.
Mm.
So when we get back to Alfonso Don, she gifts him some clothing, but he can collect it when Matthew Henry Wilson has completed his portrait. By all accounts, Wilson never painted a posthumous portrait of full-length portrait of Abraham Lincoln. Mm. So before Don collects the clothing, he discovers that a young lady, she's just a teenager, her name is Vinnie Ream, she requests to borrow the clothing because Congress awarded her a commission. This was in 1866, to sculpt a lifelike statue of Abraham Lincoln. Mary Lincoln gets wind of this and she's very angry about it. So she sends Alfonso Don another letter. And by now it is 1867. So it's almost 2 years since her husband's demise. Wilson is still holding the clothing. Mm. She sends him another letter and she basically says, collect the garments. She doesn't know who
Does this include the greatcoat? Because that was also given to Don?
Well, this is something I want to allude to in just a moment. I believe it is.
Okay.
She says, collect the garments, and she calls Vinnie Ream unladylike, very forward, unknown. She didn't know who she was. And again, collect the garments, and she tells him at the bottom of the letter, share this with no one and burn it. Well, he doesn't burn it. And again, he and his heirs wisely keep that letter. Very smart. Yeah. 2 weeks later, she sends him another very short note that says, that represents kind of an about face. And she says, I wish her success. She doesn't have much experience, but you can let her proceed. Oh. So with that proviso, Alfonso Don allows Vinnie Ream to borrow the clothing. Now, what kind of clothing was it? And this is her wonderful statue, which was unveiled in 1871. She worked on it sculpted it here in Washington City, and also in Italy. Oh, wow. It's a really masterful piece of art, and it's on, you can see it in the Capitol Rotunda today. And I encourage, if anyone hasn't taken a Capitol tour, it's a great tour, and you'll see this when you visit the Rotunda. Whether she had the greatcoat, I am not sure. Mm-hmm. As you can see, he has a cape around his shoulders. He's not using the greatcoat, but it is the suit. And there was a journalist called Guy Allison. He wrote a history. He wrote a column back in the 60s, 50s, mm-hmm. very, very syndicated column. And he talked about when he viewed this beautiful piece of art, he said you could see the president's coat that he was assassinated in, gaze upon the Assassination Relic. But whether it included the greatcoat in his loan to Ms. Ream, I'm not sure. I'm still looking. Yeah. Not sure about that, though.
But he did have Don also, so we're not sure how, we know Don received the greatcoat from Mrs. Lincoln, ostensibly at the same time that I guess we don't know. Yeah, it's just one of those timelines. We know Don ended up with the greatcoat, and he ended up with this suit of clothes, and makes sense that they would be given at the same time. But we really don't know that, do we?
No, it's a mystery.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Vinnie Ream she makes this sculpture, and then eventually does eventually get the clothing back?
Yes, and
Okay.
I suspect, based on the correspondence that I read, that it was in the early 1870s. He gets the
Oh,
clothing
wow.
back,
Long
and
time.
what he does is he puts them in a chest, a storage chest in his home,
Hmm.
and he stores the chest in a bedroom, a spare bedroom in his Washington City home, and he allows people to visit the clothing from time to time. Really makes no public statement about linking any of the garments to the president's death
Oh, okay.
while he's alive.
Hmm.
Alfonso Don dies in the 1880s. He's just 49. Most
Hmm.
likely, he died of tuberculosis. And the clothing goes to his son, Frank, and his daughter in law. They inherit the clothing. And then in the 1890s, it is his children
Hmm.
who begin to associate the entire collection with Lincoln's death. And they go through various uh, what's the word I want? So they make various attempts to place the clothing where they feel it ultimately belongs, whether it's in the house where Lincoln died, which is a museum
Hmm.
opening up in the 1890s across the street from Ford's Theater. They eventually, and it fails there, they also try to place the clothing in the Lincoln Memorial.
Hmm.
The Lincoln Memorial began construction in 1912. They enlisted the help of a congressman. And then they also tried to put the clothing in the Smithsonian after it failed, after it made repeated attempts, after repeated failed attempts.
Hmm.
Now, by 1920, Alfonso Don, he's the doorkeeper, he
Hmm.
gives it to his son Frank, and Frank dies also at the age of 49.
Oh, wow.
So who is left with the coat and the suit? It's Frank Don's widow, which is Alfonso Don's daughter-in-law.
Got it.
All right. Now, she secured an attorney to negotiate with the Smithsonian in 1920. And he made it very clear that she could not donate the garments because it was substantially all she had. In short, she was a widow and she needed the money.
Yeah.
All right. She was willing, if there would be a sponsor, she would donate the garments to the Smithsonian. Well, the Smithsonian is interested. However, there's one person out there that they want to authenticate the garments, and that's Robert Lincoln.
Mm.
At the time, he had a home in Georgetown. This is 1920. He's an elder statesman. So they write to him in 1920. He doesn't reply.
Mm.
They wait months after months after months, and then they start sending internal memoranda among each other, several folks, and they say, we need to make another approach. How are we going to approach the president's eldest son? And they decide, they come up with the idea that they're going to offer to call upon him personally,
Mm.
visit him at his home. Well, that does the trick. Lincoln responds within a day. He says he has no doubt they're authentic, and yet he says that he's personally never seen them.
And he wasn't there, obviously, when his father was assassinated. And even
Correct.
Alfonso Don, he was at Grover's Theater with Tad Lincoln on the night that that
Yes.
happened, which is probably makes sense why Mary Lincoln, maybe they didn't know him very long, but that service of taking care of Tad.
Right. I feel
Yeah.
he endeared himself to Mary Lincoln.
Yeah.
Tad was a handful, as we
Right.
know,
Yeah.
and the doorkeeper spent a lot of time with him, including Alfonso Don.
Hmm.
So now the Smithsonian gets this letter, um, and the proposed sale, as they called it, was up again. They referred to it as up again. Where were they going to get a sponsor?
Yeah.
Lincoln also said in his letter that he wants the clothing to be put away hereinafter and never displayed.
Oh.
Basically, he's telling them, yes, I feel it's authentic. I've never seen it, but store it away. Don't
Mm.
put it on display. Now, that's not what the Smithsonian had planned to do.
Right.
So the sale quickly collapsed. They weren't going to get a sponsor. I mean, this was 1921 now,
Hmm.
where they're not going to put it on eBay,
Right.
right? Or there's not going to be an auction
Yeah.
at the time. So That changed it. That was negated it for the Smithsonian. But here we have Mrs. Don, widowed Mrs. Don, who still needs the money.
Yeah.
So in a few years, she has a representative. This is 1924. Contact Brooks Brothers. And this is when they enlightened Brooks Brothers to the fact that the Greatcoat still exists.
Oh, my. Yeah.
It knew from its files that they created it for Lincoln, but they didn't know what happened to it. So they were thrilled by this. And the representative said, look, we're going to sell you, we sell you the whole collection. That would be the greatcoat and the suit. Mm-hmm. Brooks Brothers responded with a wire that said, we're interested. The representative gets back within a day and says they're asking $20,000 for the collection. Ooh. And that collapsed. This is 1921. Yeah. Brooks Brothers later wrote that they found the price too prohibitive and they decided to let it go.
So
here we are.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, when it comes to the suits or the frock coats, we know Brooks Brothers made the greatcoat. Can you confirm that any of these suits or any of these frock coats were made by Brooks Brothers?
Good question. No, because there's no label. Brooks Brothers labeled everything. And I don't believe that they made any of the suits. And also, when I look through the archives at Brooks Brothers, I found letters that documented that said, from what we can tell in our records, we've only created the greatcoat, the overcoat for the president.
Gotcha.
There would have been some label. They would have the label on the coat. The label would have been on the trousers. Nothing. There's nothing on them. So it's just the overcoat, but nevertheless, they weren't going to pay $20,000. Yeah. This is January 1924. Mrs. Don, I guess at this point, look, she tried. Yeah. She tried to place it in various institutions and even went to the maker of the greatcoat and was rebuffed at each attempt. Yeah. And what does she do? She wisely secures a very well-known auctioneer in Philadelphia. His name is Stan Henkels, and she decides to put the clothing up for auction. And this is 1924. So Stan Henkels astutely gets a lot of press for a pre-publicity press for the auction. And there are loads of articles that said the Lincoln's death garments will be on sale. And it described the clothing. It described the overcoat as ripped and torn, and that the suit was in a great state of preservation. So the auction goes up in 1924. And it goes on February 19th, 1924 in Philadelphia. And it's quickly shot down to a bidder who calls himself Mr. Douglas. He pays $6,500 for the garments, and then he disappears. He leaves the auction room. So the next day, the press comes out with all sorts of reports that the Lincoln's clothing sold for $6,500 to a man named Mr. Douglas. Some of the press reports questioned, who was this man? Was he hired by the family to make a bid? Was it an organization or an institution behind him? Mm-hmm. And there were several articles that quickly popped up within a day of the auction. But what happened was that drama was quickly trumped because a historical society out in Chicago, within a day and a half of the auction, said, hold up, stop. The coat that you sold in Philadelphia is not Lincoln's assassination garment. We have it here, and it's been on display for a number of years.
And that's where the cool drama of your book comes in, is these two groups. So let's go back to that one in Chicago. So we followed the Don coat, really just Mary Lincoln lent it out to some artists. It eventually went to Alfonso Don, passed to his son, passed to his daughter-in-law. She tries to sell it, or she sells it at auction. But then tell us about the one in Chicago. Where does that one come from?
Yeah, that comes also from Mary Lincoln.
Of course.
Via Thomas Pendel, the doorkeeper, and a valet at the White House named Charles Forbes. And it goes back to, again, in May of 1865, Charles Forbes, who is a valet at the White House and an usher, you might want to call him an usher, a valet, he claimed, and through an affidavit, that he was helping Mrs. Lincoln pack her things as she was getting ready to leave the White House. And there is Lincoln's assassination suit. And he basically says, "What shall I do with this?" He claims that she said, "Do anything you like with it. Don't let me see it again." Mm. So he keeps it, and he eventually gives just the frock coat to the doorkeeper, Thomas Pendel. He later said he didn't know what happened to the waistcoat, which is the vest, or the trousers. So he gives the frock coat to Thomas Pendel. Thomas Pendel keeps it in his possession. And in the early 1800s, he wisely allows, at least from his standpoint, reporters to come in and view the garment, which was described as Lincoln's death garment. He even gave pieces of the coat to President Hayes, Rutherford Hayes, and there are snippets of it at the Hayes Library today. This is while Don is still working at. He's an usher at the. He's a doorkeeper at the White House, and then we have Pendel, who's a doorkeeper at the White House. Pendel is claiming publicly that he has this frock coat in his possession. Alfonso Don has a frock coat, and he's keeping it in storage in his house. Now,
and they're working together.
Correct. Now, Charles Forbes, Thomas Pendel later claims that Tad Lincoln gave him the frock coat. Oh. So we're not, and there was some contention there. So we're not sure whether.
So he cuts Forbes out of the narrative completely.
He does, and Thomas Pendel produces 4 affidavits, and he never mentions that Charles Forbes gave him the coat. He does in 3 of them at least say that Tad gave him the coat on or about, I think, the 22nd of April. Now, you can dig into that and say, well, Thomas Pendel was accompanying Lincoln's remains on the funeral train at that time. He wasn't in the White House. What's more plausible is I feel that Charles Forbes, who remained in the White House during all of the funeral
and was there at the assassination. He was with the Lincolns. He sat outside the box and let Booth into the box.
That's right. And I believe that Charles Forbes gave it to Pendel. I think there's a little drama. There's a lot of drama in a lot of this here, but I think that's part of the drama. Yeah. But I feel it's a genuine Lincoln assassination garment. And because Pendel was getting all this publicity, a well-known collector of Lincoln relics named Frank Logan, he's in Chicago. He reads about it and he visits Pendel's home in the late 1800s, the 1890 or early 1890s, 1889. He visits Pendel's home. He buys the frock coat, and from Charles Forbes, he also buys the president's gray shawl. And he buys also from Pendel a lock of the president's hair. Pendel claims that he was given a lock from some hair from the president's beard as a thank you gift because he guarded the room where the autopsy took place on April 15th. So here we have this well-connected and prominent merchant from Chicago. He buys these relics. And this is 1892. And the first thing he does is he puts them on display in 1893 at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Yeah. And they put the frock coat, and it is described as beholding Lincoln's death garment. Yeah. And then from there, Frank Logan has it on display, gets a lot of press in 1909 during Lincoln's centennial. And then by 1911, he loans it to the Chicago Historical Society for permanent display. He doesn't quite donate it, but he loans it to them. And people are viewing this wonderful relic or the sacred relic that Abraham Lincoln wore during the last hours of his life. And then just a few days before the auction, he donates it to the Chicago Historical Society.
Oh, okay.
All right. And this is
They
also in
own it.
1924, just a few days before. So you have the Chicago Historical Society claiming that what went on in Philadelphia was crooked work. It was crooked. That's not the real one. Even though the Henkels, the auctioneer, said we have letters from Mrs. Lincoln which supports the provenance of the coat. However, it doesn't mention anything about an assassination. All
Right.
right. They're genuine Lincoln relics.
Hmm.
And what happens is I feel, is that Chicago was going to investigate. There was all this
Yeah, I was
brouhaha.
gonna ask. You have these
Yeah,
fighting. I love the chapter about the drama, the crooked
yeah,
work, and they're just the Chicago Historical Society is so aggressive in how they're calling out the fraud that's happening in
yeah.
Philadelphia. And yet, what sort of investigation did they collectively do to sort it out at the time in 1924?
Nothing.
That's crazy to me.
No,
We,
Frank Logan, the patron, wrote a very strong-worded letter to him, to the Chicago Historical Society, noting that what he gave them was genuine. And I feel that they deferred to him. He was a donor. He
Mhm,
was well known in Chicago, and he did produce supporting affidavits from Pendel and from Forbes.
mhm.
So nothing happened. The Don family took the clothing back with them.
So,
Uh,
but I thought they sold it.
well, good point. Did they or did they not? The granddaughter of Alfonso Don, later said that because the minimum price was not met, the clothing was returned to them.
Oh,
That's one theory. The other theory is a letter that I found in the Chicago Historical Society's archives, written in 1940, which wrote to the Chicago Historical Society, and she wanted to know about the coat that they had on display. And she said that she was friends of Robert Lincoln, and Robert Lincoln told her that he gave Mrs. Don some money because he didn't want the clothing sold and she needed the money badly.
oh.
So
Hmm.
whether he gave her the money, whether Lincoln was behind it, whether they didn't meet a fixed minimum price, I'm not sure what happened. But the clothing went back to the Don family. They lived in the Washington, D.C. area at the time,
Mhm.
and it went there in storage. Meanwhile, in Chicago, for the next 25 years, the black frock coat enthralled its visitors, including the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt,
Hmm.
various correspondents. Carveth Wells, who was an explorer, he had a column about the coat. And it was well known that that coat was in Chicago, and that was the coat that Lincoln wore during the final hours of his life.
Gotcha. So, like you say, after 1924, this auction, the Don family still somehow retains their clothes. Chicago
Right.
Historical Society has their own, and then the Great Depression hits. Times are tough, and nobody's buying expensive artifacts. But the Don family is still trying to offload this. I mean, make some money. Now it's a granddaughter. It's been passed on to. So you already alluded to this, but in 1940 this Dawn descendant writes to Brooke Brothers trying to sell it to them. Is this the first? Yeah, this is the second time now that they've become aware of
Yes.
it. The original asking price years ago was what, $20,000, and
Mhm.
now they're asking probably less since the Great Depression has hit. What does Brooks Brothers respond to this 1940 offer? How much do the Dons want for it, and what do the Brooks Brothers do?
Well, they're interested because the asking price is a mere $5,500.
Yeah, that's dropped quite a
So
bit.
yeah, it's 1940.
Mhm.
Brooks Brothers is interested, very much interested. But what their plan is that they're going to purchase the relics, and then they're going to donate them to the Smithsonian for
Oh, it's
safekeeping
the
and for
sponsorship
preservation. Yes.
that they
So
tried to
Brooks
do
Brothers,
decades before.
right, correct. Brooks Brothers is going to be the patron that the
Nice.
Don family had looked for in 1920. So there's some correspondence back and forth between the Smithsonian. It looks like it's a done deal. And then there's a quick about face where the secretary of the Smithsonian writes to um, Brooks Brothers, and they're withdrawing their offer to keep the relics there for preservation and safekeeping. They don't go into detail.
Mhm.
So the Brooks Brothers advertising director, his name is Donald Vaughn, he writes to them and he says, basically, can you tell us why aren't you
Please
why
take
the
these
reverse?
free things.
Right. Why? And they said the gruesome, they called the relics gruesome, and they couldn't preserve items that are associated with assassination and death. So
Which is
that was
crazy
it.
because
So
they already have so many of those
correct,
things.
correct. By then they did. They had
Yeah.
even the death mask of Lincoln by that time. Clark Mills, I think,
Well,
don't
it's
they?
actually a life mask, but it seems like a
Yeah.
death mask. But yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. Clark Mills. That was right before he died.
Yeah.
It's
February of
18.
1865.
Yes,
Yes.
that's right.
But
That's
they do
right.
have, like I said, they have all the things associated with the conspirators. They have the hoods.
Yes, the
I mean,
hoods.
and they
Mhm.
have, yeah, I mean, obviously other things in different museums in
Right.
Washington, but like the like, yeah, at that point in 1940, like they have the bullet, I mean, it went to the National Museum of Health and Medicine or the Army Medical Museum, but I'm gonna say they have the bullet that killed Lincoln, type of thing. So they definitely have assassination relics. And so it's crazy to me that they're like, no, that's too gross. But in your book, you describe also during the auction in 1924, there was a subset of people who were greatly offended, like Robert Todd, who like just wanted back in the, back earlier, who just wanted it to be put away. Lots of
Mhm.
people who were offended by the idea that these blood relics of Lincoln's were
Mhm.
being sold, which makes sense as is a moral thing. Like I'm one of those Indiana Jones people. It belongs in a museum. Sure, but now this is a museum who's like, no, we don't want it either, which is very, very
Right.
strange today to think of.
Right. There were newspaper editorials that called it an affront to Lincoln's memory.
Wow.
And there was one writer to the paper who posed the rhetorical question, what do you think if we decided to auction the Statue of Liberty? I mean, and I thought that was, interesting point. And their argument was that these belong to the American people and they should be in an institution where they can be revered.
Sure. But
Um,
not even the institution wants them,
no, no,
apparently.
they just weren't interested. Another thought too is, did the Smithsonian, were they looking back at Robert Lincoln's request,
Mm,
not wanting anything publicly displayed? In my first book, I talked about the humiliation that Mary Lincoln and probably her son endured during the old clothes scandal in the
mhm.
1800s when there was a sale of her clothing, and did they just, maybe they were still honoring Robert Lincoln, who had since been dead for a number of years, maybe honoring his request.
That's a good idea. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
true. So again, the Don family failed to
Right.
offload these relics, even at a bargain price.
Mhm.
And your book then goes on to talk about it takes another like 30 years from 1940 almost, but eventually they managed to sell their collection of clothing. How does that come about, and who is the recipient of the overcoat and the Don collection with the frock coat and the whole suit?
Yes. Well, the reason why they were able to sell their clothing as Lincoln's assassination clothing was that in 1949, the director of the Chicago Historical Society, his name was Paul Angle, very renowned Lincoln
Mhm.
scholar. He removed their frock coat from display, quietly removed it.
Ah,
He
okay.
later called it a phony. And what helped him
After
make
they
that
had fought so hard over it and called
correct?
everyone else a phony.
Mhm. What influenced his decision was that Alfonso Don's granddaughter, her name was Dorothy, she sent a representative to meet with Mr. Angle in 1949. Mr. Angle, they didn't send the clothing, but she sent the affidavits from Mary Lincoln. Pardon me, the letters from Mary Lincoln.
Right.
Three letters. There were three letters written to Alfonso Don, her grandfather. Included were affidavits, and there were also some affidavits from Brooks Brothers. Now, Brooks Brothers attested that it made the greatcoat for his second inauguration, but it said nothing about the assassination. Nevertheless, these documents convinced Angle, and he later said that the real assassination clothing um, belonged to those people, he called them the Don family in North Carolina. By then, his granddaughter was living in North Carolina.
I see.
So he wrote a memo in 1949, an internal memo, and he says, basically, I have this day removed the frock coat from exhibit. And he basically says it's not what it purports to be. He later told a correspondent, a journalist, that he determined the coat was a phony and quietly hid it away. It's still there in storage.
Oh, it's never come back. It's never come back on display.
No, it's still there in
Wow.
storage.
Since 49. Wow.
Yeah, my book does show some pictures of the coat. So now that the Don collection is crowned as the Assassination Relics, the Don, his heirs now move forward to again place it with an institution where it can be properly cared for. But they run into a lot of roadblocks again in the 50s. National Park Service isn't interested. They try the Smithsonian again several times,
Wow.
including just a few months after John F. Kennedy's assassination. And they just, in an internal memo, they say, this is really not the time to acquire stuff like this. Dorothy Don Smith is her name, the granddaughter. 1967, she becomes a widow, and she meets with her husband's, their estate attorney, in a bank in North Carolina, the Wachovia Bank in Greensboro, North Carolina. And they go into the vault to examine some safe deposit boxes, and there's a rather large one on the bottom.
You need to have a big one for all the clothes.
Right. And she points to it. Oh, I have Abraham Lincoln's assassination clothing in here.
Wow.
Well, I was fortunate to interview the attorney, Mr. Wrightsell, before he passed away, and he thought, what is this? What's going on here? Well, they open up the box, and in paper grocery bags, all these garments that come out. Yeah. And he sees the greatcoat, he sees the suit, and he encourages her to try to sell them again. And
she's like, I've been trying her whole life at this point.
Yeah. She relays everything, but she's now widowed. They're not quite sure where it's going to go. And they're going to make one more attempt. So they try the Smithsonian, and Smithsonian turns them down, and they refer to the office suit. They said, we already have an office suit, but they say Ford's Theater is going to reopen again. As you know, it was closed immediately right after the performance, and it was opening again as a living memorial to the man and his love of theater. It was planning to be opened in 1968. And he said, now basically the Smithsonian said, you got to take advantage of this. So Dorothy Don Smith and her attorney waged a media campaign. They took out an ad in the New York Times offering to sell the Don collection. They were asking $50,000, although it wasn't indicated in that. They wanted $50,000 for the collection. That caught the eye of a congressman from Iowa, I think Representative Schwengel. He was, they called him Mr. History. He was the chair of the Capitol Historical Society. And he was interested in securing the garments for Ford's Theater and returning them to Ford's Theater. A congressional appropriation would be unlikely given the price. So the Don family, through their attorney, contacted even Hollywood producers. They all said no. Nothing was going anywhere. They even went back to Brooks Brothers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Keeping in the loop.
The great-grandson of the founder, his name was Ashbel Wall, he said that asking price of $50,000 is way out of line. And he said, no, bad move, bad investment move. They should have bought it, right? So it looks like they're going to fail again. They failed. They completely failed. But what happens just weeks before Ford's Theater is scheduled to reopen, and this is in 1968, Schwengel, who's the congressman, he's at another event unrelated to any of this, and it's a luncheon with the American Trucking Associations, and he starts telling the secretary with whom he is sitting. He's sitting with the secretary, and he starts telling him about his quest to secure the garments for Ford's Theater. And the secretary says, look, if they're going to take $25,000, I'll have the check in your hand in a day. Well, guess what? She took it.
Wow.
And they took the Don collection out of the lockbox, out of the paper bags. They put them in a suitcase, and the attorney took them up, flew up on a plane, of course,
Just in
to
a suitcase.
Washington, D.C.
Hmm.
And the American Trucking Associations, through one of its suppliers, presented the check to the Capitol Historical Society.
Hmm.
And the Capitol Historical Society donated it to the Department of the Interior. And then they unveiled the clothing just a few days before the theater opened.
It's
And the clothing was of course, the overcoat and the black suit, which would include the waistcoat and the trousers.
It's just amazing to me how, after all of that, trying to find someone to buy it, it is the Association of Truckers that come
Yeah,
forth and buy it and then donate it to the American people. Brooks
right.
Brothers tried to do it too, but yeah, it's just yeah that
They did. Yeah,
it's the strangest connection to be like these truckers are really gonna make sure we have
right.
this important relic, which I'm glad they did. Um,
Yeah,
Renette,
so
we've
am I.
we've been chatting for a long time, and we've gone into a lot of your really interesting stories, but really we've only scratched the surface. But the big thing, of course, and we're not going to reveal the ending because, of course, we still, out of these two coats, we have the one in Chicago, we have the one now at Ford's Theater. The debate is which one is the real Frock coat, and we're not going to reveal that because I want people to buy your book.
Mhm.
But like already, I just it's these stories that you've told and that you tell in the book that really make it so well written. It's so compelling. I'm going to bring up a picture of it. And, they all have this connection to Mrs. Lincoln. And what makes your book successful in my mind is the way in which you really commit to investigating each coat. You provide the narrative of its path from 1865 to today, as much as you have here in our talk.
Mhm.
And your concluding chapters, at the conclusion of every chapter, you have the documentary evidence regarding everything you've said, which I love the way you've set that up. It's like, here is the narrative that we're telling you, and then here are kind of the quotes from the documents themselves that prove what I have said, which is a wonderful way of kind of presenting this history. The coats and the impressive figures of their past kind of become characters in this mystery as you kind of explore like the means, the motive, and opportunity for each one of them to possibly be the one that Lincoln was wearing. And then in the last two chapters, you put it all together along with the physical evidence, the descriptions from Dr. Leal, as you mentioned before, to really not only explain the likely culprits, which one do you think is the real one, but it really altogether shows how to kind of conduct this historical research. It's a thorough investigation and a perfect example of how to like do history, which is why I was so enthralled by it. It was really a delight to read this new book, and I hope that everyone who has watched this today will pick up a copy of this one, Lincoln's Frock Coat, and also your older book about Lincoln's Greatcoat. But before I have us wrap up, what I was struck by when I first started your book is you have a quote that you include at the epigraph at the very beginning, and then you use it again in your concluding chapter. And it comes from a newspaper account that came out in 1924 during the big brouhaha over which coat, the Chicago one or the Don one, which one is real. And so I kind of want to read it and kind of ask you about it because
Mhm.
I absolutely loved it. It says it's from the Springfield Daily Republican newspaper in Massachusetts, and of course they have no dog in this fight. It's not from like a Chicago paper or like a DC paper or Philadelphia paper, but just unbiased paper. And they wrote after President Lincoln's death, White House employees asked Mrs. Lincoln for relics of her husband, and she undoubtedly gave away several suits of clothes, overcoats, silk stocks, tall hats, and the like. What more natural than for each recipient to form the conviction, after the lapse of years, that he had the very article of apparel Lincoln wore when he attended Ford's Theater on the night of the assassination? I love that quote, but why did you decide you wanted to begin and essentially end your book with this quote?
Well, because when we look at the doorkeepers, I mean, they endeared themselves to the president, Pendel. Thomas Pendel, the doorkeeper, said he loved Mr. Lincoln more than anyone else in his life.
Mhm.
The heirs of Alfonso Don claim they had a warm, that their ancestor Alfonso Don had a warm relationship with the president. And as we got farther and farther from the rebellion, Lincoln's name was becoming more revered and more loved as he was recognized as the savior of the Union. So these men and even the nation, when there were remarks about beholding the garments in the Smithsonian from people who didn't even know the president, there was this reverence for him, and it would that definitely would be the assassination garment. I think they just assumed that because of their great love of the president, because of their relationship with him, that this indeed must be the coat. I believe they were all sincere. I don't believe Don's ancestors were disingenuous, especially his son and daughter-in-law in the late 1800s, when they began to first claim that it was Lincoln's assassination garments. I just believe that it was their adulation, as I call it, for the president, and that they had the very article that the nation's greatest martyr wore at his time of death, and it just assumed that they held it. And what I say at the end is their love for him is admirable and
Yeah.
enduring, and it's wonderful to see even the nation's love for what many of us consider is our greatest U.S. president ever. But we can't just look at endearment or adulation. We need to look at the facts and the evidence. And I bring out the surgeons, and we need to look at their actions in the box that night. Even though both surgeons adored the president as well, or endeared to him, Dr. Leal referred to Lincoln as the savior he wanted to go to attend the theater that night to catch a glimpse of the savior of the country.
Yeah.
And Dr. Taft wrote touchingly of the Lincolns and their visits to patients in the hospital. But we're not looking at how they all felt about the president. What we're looking at is the actual evidence and the reports of really Lincoln's first responders, I feel, clinched the deal here. And now it's up the next step to bring in forensics or whatever. But I think we can't overlook what went on in that box. And they put aside all of their adulations for the president, and they really worked to save his life. And we need to look at what they did during that course of activity in the box that night.
Yeah, and the book is a testament to just how to do history. You have these competing, theories, you have these competing relics, and you have honest people behind them, even though there are the
Yes.
claims of fraud on both sides type of thing. That wasn't the case. You do have people who legitimately believe that they have the last coat that Lincoln ever wore. And it is out of love. It's not out of, yes, of course, the Don family are trying to sell it. It's the same thing as Pendel and Forbes. Well, Forbes gives it, but Pendel sells things as well. Sure, there's some monetary value, but the recipients, Mary Lincoln gave these coats, all three of these coats, to people who saw like the importance of having a piece of Abraham Lincoln, who adored him. And it isn't fraud, there's creams of that, but it is this, like you said, this adoration for Lincoln, and they're all legitimate. And how do we as historians, when they, like I said, all three are connected to Mary Lincoln, they all have strong provenance stories. And so it's getting beyond that, beyond just the feelings, and really doing the in-depth research that you have done to seek outside sources too, to figure it out. That you just looking at the documents that come from Don and the documents come from Pendel and all of that, you wouldn't be able to solve which one of these is the real one until you also look outside of that into the other historical facts that we find with the first responders and things like that. And so I love how your book tells us these stories. It tells us how each one has this connection, and then in the end, you kind of bring in the outside evidence to be like, which one is the real one, if any of them. Add even more drama. But it really is so well written that the book reads like a mystery. It reads like a thriller where you have these different suspects, and that you really want to read to the end to see which one is the real one. And so, as I told you before we started, I read the book in a day. I got it, it came in the mail. I started reading it, be like, oh, let me just, it's a long book, but let me just, start going through it. And then I couldn't stop. I was like, I needed to figure out which coat was the real one. And I loved the journey of how each one became known to be connected to this story, and the way that you've presented everything. It's just masterfully done, and I really enjoyed it. So again, I hope everyone who will watch this will go and buy the book. Like, you can get it on Amazon, you get it wherever you get your books. It's really, really well done. And also, I hope everyone checks out your 2019 book, Lincoln's Greatcoat: The Unlikely Odyssey of a Presidential Relic. Reignette, I am so grateful to you for coming on and chatting with me today. I love your work. Is there any more Lincoln clothing books in your future?
Well, not yet, but
Okay.
who knows what can happen? As I said, with research,
Yeah.
you find a little nugget and it leads to something else. Nothing is ever solved,
Right.
um, and we'll see what comes out of this book. But one never knows. I just want to just plug also your local library.
Absolutely.
I always encourage people just to ask your local librarian to order the book, and then you can borrow the books from there as well, and they can put it in their collection.
It's the
So,
best way of getting other people exposure to it, because it's in the library. Yeah, it's a great way to
right,
do it.
and you don't have to go out and spend your money. That's why our wonderful libraries are there, and they're always so willing to get bring in new books. So
Absolutely.
don't
And
forget your local library.
no, never. I worked the
Yeah.
library for many years. Yeah, big fan of
Yep.
libraries. Riet,
Mhm.
where can people find you? I know you have a wonderful Facebook page, which is, if you search for Lincoln's Greatcoat, it'll pop
Yes.
up. That seems to be, and I know you're doing, and that still uses the title of the first book, but you've been
Right.
talking a lot
I'll have
about
to
your new
I have
book
to
as
figure
well.
out how to update that. Yep.
Or even if that, are there other places that we can find you online, or is that the best place?
That's probably the best place. I do have a LinkedIn page, so you can
Mhm.
message me there. LinkedIn, you've just searched for my name. I'm under an author researcher, and LinkedIn or Facebook is the best place. You can always contact my publisher, which is McFarland. They have information on me as well, contact information.
And hopefully we'll see you doing some book talks about this, going back to the Lincoln Group of New York. I hope they'll have you come back to talk about this one, and then they'll give you an idea for the next book.
I know, and I'll be taking notes on the train on the way home, thinking, do this, do that. So,
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. And to everyone who watched this, thank you so much for watching it. Lincoln's Frock Coat. It's a great book. You get it from your local library. Buy it for yourself. Buy it as a gift for others. You won't regret it. And you'll be able to get the answer to the mystery, which frock coat is the real one, because we're leaving you with a teaser. We got to read the book to figure it out. But thank you again to my guest, Reignette Chilton, for speaking with me today. Until next time, I'm Dave Taylor from LincolnConspirators.com, and signing off. Bye.
bye.